Delicate subject. Chapter 24. Kaylee was convinced, and David would not be deterred, quiet and unmoving, answering questions. He reassured Kaylee that he would be all right. He reassured her that he wanted to, had to, needed to do this. They made a touching image, roles reversed, David consoling her with quiet dignity, Kaylee's face distraught. Kaylee insisted on sending Rennie to Sowen, and Asari, who had been caring for David closely, onto the Normandy with him. Rennie had volunteered, and didn't want to leave David with no recourse for communication, and although Legion was willing, he may not be able to navigate the fact that David sometimes needed food and rest when he was obsessed, and getting them for him was... Rennie had deadpanned her answer. Difficult. Commander Shepard, I can help. Please, if he can do this, I can do this. So Grunt's old cabin was refurbished for a young male human and an Asari of youthful disposition who was probably a few centuries old. Legion spent a great deal of time with David there, so the extra space helped. Rennie reminded Shepard of Liara when they'd first met. Rennie had the enthusiasm of a child and the discipline of a drill sergeant, and she was absolutely a welcome addition in terms of helping a military-run ship accommodate and work with the temperament of an autistic savant. Rennie did not bargain. She informed him of what he needed, and he acquiesced. Her long association with David meant she knew his needs and had them tuned to what he required. Rennie said after she'd gotten David to agree to sleep for a precise 6 hours with an alarm, "You have to promise me not to push him too hard. If I say he has had enough, he has had enough. I'm grateful to see him connecting to Legion. That's a miracle, truly. But David is smart. Smart beyond measure, and he can be manipulative when he wants something. He wants this. I haven't seen him want anything more. I need you to listen to me." Shepard grinned at her. "Smart and manipulative, I understand. If it's in my power to give it to you, you'll have it. Please, if you have any ideas on how to help, let me know. I'm actually hanging back because I don't think my communication is clean enough for him. Legion is translating for me. You can translate for me. Okay?" Rennie looked relieved. "Thank you. That will work. I really don't understand what's going on, but David does. I can help because I can tell when he gets frustrated, when he gets hungry, when he gets tired. I'll keep him on track. Rennie, you'd be surprised how many people, some of them commanders, who don't know that for themselves and still need help." Rennie grinned at her. "I might not be surprised. Adults are just big kids with no bedtime sometimes." "I think you just described the council. Okay, we're changing course to Legion's destination. Do not hesitate to let me know what you need. I trust to your discretion. In return, I expect that no information about anything you see leaves this ship, and if you see scary people on the Normandy, which you will, well, you seem to be able to navigate. You're going to see that Reapers are real, and we need to do something about that. I'm proud you're willing to do something about it. Outside of David's concerns, this is a military ship, one with Turian, Drell, Quarian, and some colorful human help. You let me know what you need. You set your boundaries. If you need help policing them or enforcing them, ask me. That will work." I'm excited. And nervous. That also describes a certain commander. I'm going to go talk to Legion for a bit. If you need to adhere to David's schedule, get some sleep yourself while you can. You might have a lot of time ahead of you, listening to clicking. Thank you. And good night, Commander Shepard. Try to get some sleep yourself. I will. Sleep well. Sleep sounded beguiling and welcoming. This was one of those times when she should take a break. And she wasn't going to, and she wouldn't let them tell her to stop. She had to talk to Legion and get the mission straight before David woke up in 6 hours. She was trying to measure all the helplessness involved in realizing she had minds beyond her capacity to understand, controlling her fate. She could take a moment to focus, so she headed first to her favorite shuttle and locked the door against intrusion. She sat for an unguarded moment, felt her face fall to slack, felt the referred hum through her body. She tried to define some sense out of her chaotic internal rant. I have no fucking clue what's gonna happen. I'm about to give Ship access to a Geth and an autistic genius. Yeah, they're both smarter than me, but I don't have to like it. I don't like it. I really, really don't like it. She sought faith and found it, not in words, but in the internal rush of what Thane's people called rightness. She believed in it. She believed in them. She would have to give up control and believe in the potential. She said out loud, "Edie?" "Yes, Commander Shepard?" "This is a Jane moment." "Yes, Jane? What do you need?" "What do you think about David Archer and Legion being able to directly access your processes?" I am looking forward to it. It seems they have found company in each other. Maybe they could find company in me. With me. Do you think they could do you harm? Yes, but I do not think they will. Odds are low. David Archer does not know malice. Legion wishes to reach consensus. It is a risk, but much less of a risk than others we have faced. Yeah. They need access to live systems, but you can protect yourself? I hope? It would not be wise for an organic being, or a Geth, to attempt to infiltrate the system in which they live. I could certainly confine them physically, and make life impossible, inside or outside my systems. Technically or physically. I believe they both know that, and have a right to be more frightened of me than I am of them. Oh, well, that's reassuring. Thank you, Edie. You are welcome. Do not worry, Jane. I can handle it. I promise. Jane's smile was spontaneous and instant. I believe you. She sat for long minutes, letting her caffeinated sparrow heart and mind relax slightly, acknowledge the exhaustion and emptiness. She told herself what she'd said to her crew often, that enthusiasm was not necessary. All she had to do was follow orders, and her path was set. She patted the floor of the shuttle. You're still the best shuttle ever. Thank you. She went to go speak to Legion. With David and Legion managing the data flow, she had to wait for translation, but she had another concern, so she asked him, "Are you confident that David's information will give us Cerberus?" Legion nodded. For him, it was emphatic. I am confident. David Archer's inability to communicate it is only due to the limited capacity of language. Once inside a more logical system, he can copy, modify, and code already existing data concepts with astonishing speed. If he were to attempt to navigate this process with human speech, or even Geth code in a human system, He would be limited and impeded in his ability to describe linear and unnamed processes. Inside the ideal system, he will have access to already existing complex, defined parameters. He will be able to synthesize a functioning schematic of data flow and content. Geth speech does not correlate to human names for things. He cannot use our language alone. The locations, distances, and content are all measured differently. And I, as a conduit, would be limited in my ability to translate. In comparison, if you were to give him simple tools such as paper and pencil, if he were to draw a map of a ward on the Citadel, there are too many languages and too many references unavailable to him. He would be unable to label the constructs as they are labeled on the Citadel, and a drawing would be inadequate, unable to provide dimension. If he were to use Geth coding, he would be unable to describe organic concepts that do not exist in the consensus. With the hybrid system we will provide inside the Normandy's technical systems with an interface pod, he would be able to create a three-dimensional schematic. He could draw from reference, create with accuracy. It will take less time even with installation and acclimation, and be more accurate than any other method. I believe you require accuracy, and it is necessary to take the risk and the time. Okay, good, thank you. That explains it a bit more for those of us in the cheap seats. I have an idea. I want to ask you how viable you think it is. We need to take down the main Cerberus base and secondary targets simultaneously once we know where they are. The Quarians hate Cerberus for their own reasons. Geth and Quarians would have reason to work together, or at least parallel, without killing each other. It could possibly build trust. It is a long shot, but if we're going in, we need to go in with force as soon as we know. It's unlikely that there are double agents among the Quarians or the Geth, and they have reasons to want to cooperate right now, despite their differences. I want to put together a fleet. Once we begin closing in on Cerberus, they're going to want to scatter like bees swarming from a hive, and we will need to chase down individual pods and ships. We need to identify the nature of the target, capture some, track others to their ultimate destinations, and prepare raids there. Some will have stealth capacity, so we will need light spectrum detection on all approaches. We will need surveillance on Mass Effect gate travel around that time. We need to correlate exits and entries. I don't want to involve any other races at this point if we can avoid it. The Alliance will want to take anybody from Cerberus into custody themselves, and so will the Turians. And their militaries are more likely to have informants. Involving them could compromise the mission. They are both council races with enough pull to enforce wanting to overrun the mission for the credit and the intel. I need allies who will let me do what I need to do. I want the elusive man on this ship. I want to supervise his scan and surgery, and I want to supervise his debriefing. The Normandy will take on the risk of infiltrating the main base ourselves with the goal of taking the elusive man into custody, but we're going to flush everyone else out, and I need you guys to mop them up. I don't know what I can offer the Geth other than potential trust and the hope that we continue to work together. If you think of anything I can offer, let me know. Maybe they'll listen to David. Maybe they'll listen to you. When David Archer and I recover and fit the uplink modules, I will assess the possibilities. I believe if Creator Talizora can provide ships, and I can provide ships, perhaps we can build on that as a cooperative venture. The Quarians do hate Cerberus. It is a sound plan. So all we have to do is get two races that have despised each other for centuries back to the potential of coexisting in peace, and turn EDI into a virtual game system. How many modules are you bringing? 2 would be sufficient. 1 for me, 1 for David Archer. If it works on David, would it work on me? It would. You would be unable to comprehend the interface effectively to build code, but you could observe and access. I could guide you. She considered the possibilities. Okay, I have ideas. Would it be a huge difficulty to install 4 modules? No further effort. Adaptation for 1 module would be adaptation for all modules. Good. 4 it is. I would like to observe. I'm also thinking maybe Joker would like to meet Edie. It is possible he could learn to pilot the Normandy better from internal systems rather than the limitations of a human body. That's exactly what I was hoping to hear. It has possibilities. Thank you, Legion. I'll speak to Tally. David will be available in approximately 6 hours. There is gratitude he is aboard. There is from me as well. Thank you. Next stop was her quarters and a conversation with Tally. Jane explained the premise and waited out the shock. I'd ask you if you were kidding, but it does not look like you are kidding. Not kidding. You're an admiral, Tally. It's time to flex. This would be flexing, strong-arming, and then tackling. Jane grinned at her. Yeah. Are you up for it? Let me talk to Legion. The indoctrination scare has people shaken, and attention is off the geth. Let me see what I can do. I do know that maybe there is enough hatred of Cerberus that it might work, if I play this right. I have faith in you, Tally. Can I punch the elusive man when you have him in custody? Is that a requirement of your cooperation, Ms. Vast Normandy? It might be, if it comes to that. I hope it comes to that. Me too. You could always just summon Chiktika to zap him, and then you could claim that you never touched him. Okay, we've all got work to do. When I know something, we'll make some more solid plans. I can commit 17 small craft right now and 2 medium cruisers with associated transport. Those are my ships under my command. And the few that Cal Rieger can commit. Jane's eyebrows raised. Cal Rieger, huh? So, things are going well? Tally sounded like she had a huge grin on her face. Things are going well. Thank you, Jane. I think this might just be fun. That's the spirit. Talk to you soon. She paced for a short amount of time, frustrated at her inability to move forward. She could research and prepare, but honestly, it was entirely out of her hands, and she had done enough for today. Someone was going to find her before bedtime, but she was chafing at the additions of more things out of her control, and she was debating the idea of telling Garrus she was going to inconvenience him. She thought about it once. Twice. And then she sent the Omnitool alert before she could talk herself out of it. I'd like to inconvenience you. May I come to your cabin? She had no idea what he was doing. If Thane was there, well, that was the point of this, wasn't it? To be an inconvenience? None of this felt right. And she was trying to rip off some sort of bandage or some personality trait that she could not define. She did know her brain had just spit out that Garrus could help her, so she followed his advice. It seemed like it was forever ago when he had said, I want you to find me when you haven't figured out what you need, but you need something, and my name pops up in your head as the person to go to for help. He'd said please. Well, she'd asked. She'd said, "May I?" She hadn't made it a demand. That she couldn't do. Probably never. It took less than a minute to hear back. "I'll be there before you get there, even if you start now." Her head dipped down in an odd sort of relief. It couldn't be that easy. Was it easy because this was an emergency and she was a wreck? No. It was because he was that easy, in the sense that he'd told her to do this before she'd been abducted, and that she'd never done it until now. She was going to take his advice again and start now. She started feeling bad that she hadn't done this sooner, wondered if he'd been waiting. So that's what she said when she got there. The door opened to her biometrics. She hadn't been inside this room. He'd always come to her. She told him, "I should have done this sooner." He was leaning against the back wall, his mouth quirked slightly. "What is this that you're doing here?" She shrugged. "Inconveniencing you? I should have taken you up on your offer sooner." He pushed away from the wall and came to stand in front of her. "Did you ask because it occurred to you to feel guilty for not asking?" She opened her mouth, and then it hung there for a moment. "Yes. No. It didn't occur to me to feel guilty until I had already asked, but I tried to ask fast, so I didn't have to think about it." Anybody ever tell you that you have a tendency to make things really complicated? Now, who would tell me that? To my face. He stepped closer and took one hand of hers in his, put his hand around her waist, and rocked back and forth in a slow dance. It wasn't a criticism. I've grown to appreciate complicated. I'm just going to treat this like any other day, because if I make a big deal out of it, you'll probably never do it again. She followed his lead. "Are we allowed to dance if I don't ask?" He looked down at her. "Are you going to report me to the authorities? Would you send me to dance prison?" "Well, now, yes. 'Cause I want to visit you in dance prison and see what it's like." Not to make a big deal out of it, but why are you inconveniencing me? I have no idea. Okay. I can work with that. Don't give me any hints. Let me see if I can figure it out. He danced her around for a few more moments, then held still and nudged her head to the side with his mouth, a scrape of plate edges and warm breath, then a cool intake of air pulled from her skin. "You're ready for a fight. Not just ready. You can't wait for the fight. You're frustrated that you can't do it now, and you can't do it alone." Her back stiffened and his hand tightened on her waist. "And you're not even a little bit afraid of anything right now. Certainly not me." That was not what she expected to hear. "How in hell could you know that?" He nudged again at the side of her neck, the tip of his tongue along the line of her jaw as she sucked in her breath. "I know you. It's on your skin, in your eyes, in the way you touch me." "You can smell that on me?" "Yes. You've been afraid, and that's a scent like sun-baked stone on a warm wind. When you doubt, that's more like midnight rain." When you're angry, that's like the scent of a freshly broken trepa leaf. When you're determined, like now, that's like the scent of a zealous fruit still on the tree. Do you like zealous fruit? His teeth dragged along the cord of her straining throat. It's come to be a favorite. She was really sick of talking about her bullshit. She was tired of analysis and measured gains. She told him, "I'm supposed to ask you if I think you're willing to share reverie? I have almost attacked you so many times." I know. It's been good for my ego. Really good. My hands on your body, my mouth on your skin, and you want to throw yourself at me, on me, until you're clenching your teeth. I like that so much. And you make Thane so absolutely crazy. And I like that too, so much. This is all working out so well for me. She swallowed hard as his teeth moved to her collarbone and his tongue traced the line there. You didn't answer the damn question. I know. You're determined, and you always get what you want. It doesn't look like it right now, Vakarian. He bit at her collarbone. You know, right now, I don't know if it's a good idea or not. But I've learned something from a commander I followed for some of the more interesting learning experiences of my life. Sometimes you have to leap. Oh, thank fate. He pulled her by the waist, tighter to him. I'll give you 1 hour. 1 hour of anything you want. Then you don't have my permission anymore unless I tell you that you do. Then we see what the leap did. If you lie to me or do yourself harm, I'll know. I'll smell it on you. Determined doesn't mean infallible, Jane. Okay, now I have 2 mottos. Do it for the shoulders, and determined doesn't mean infallible. Please kiss me, because I am so spirits damn sick of considering every action I take. His hands came to gently hold the sides of her face, but she pulled back, wondering what defiance smelled like on Palaven. I swear to the spirits, if you are gentle with me and hold back, I'll... At her hesitation, he pulled back with a slow blink. You'll... What now? All right. I didn't think this out. Just... Fuck. Garrus, I want you. I don't want to think about it. I want you to think about it. Oh, I know. Or I won't inconvenience you again. His eyes were widening rims of black. He smiled at her entirely lame and empty threat. You're terrifying. I'm legitimately scared. As long as I entirely ignore all those moments that you looked at me and tried to restrain yourself from touching me. You think I'm ever going to forget that you spent the last few weeks so damn hungry for me you nearly broke your fingers, clenching your hands into fists? I'm out of fucking practice. With a sharp laugh from him, vertigo struck, and she was pressed against the back wall of his cabin where he'd recently been leaning, and his mouth captured hers. She was anticipating an even wanton invasion, but reverie was gentle. It spread through her system as dizziness mixed with defiance. He was hard and relentless, and he was Garrus, and she loved him, and she wanted him so badly she was shaken. Then there was the massive relief of meeting her tongue to his and feeling nothing but yes, the wall of fear that had stood between them shimmering and fallen as though it had never existed. She passed through and beyond. And then it was just one more leap they'd made together. Just one more step on the path. She'd never be forced to leave his side again. She would fight and plan and make sure she never waited a moment too long to tell him, to show him. Her hands found the gaps and plaits at his waist and the warm hide behind his fringe. Her arrogant, confident Tauren was shaken, his arm around her waist trembling. Her fear gone, even her defiance fell away as unnecessary. She was buoyed by his body, by his strength. The trembling reminding her of his own walls of fear that could come down now. She moved her hands purposefully and tore at his shirt, eliciting a gasp and a growl from him as she spread her hands over scent ridges and dragged them down her throat. All the power and pleasure possible flooded her at claiming her Turian. She had to do one more thing before the tide swept her away, and he overwhelmed her entirely. He was welcome to do it, with her demanding that he do it. 1 hour only of joining before time was up. Oh, she'd throw herself at him every day of her life if he tried to retreat. She bit down on his tongue until she tasted his blood, then drove her tongue against the point of one of his teeth and let the storm take her all downhill, the flood seeking the sea. She expected to be overwhelmed, but he pulled back, tilted his crest to her forehead. I'm so sorry, Karim. I didn't protect you. I don't deserve you. I'm so sorry. I couldn't find you. I began to believe you were dead. I didn't stop looking, but I did not think I could find you. And I didn't. And I couldn't have. You came back on your own. Don't forgive me, but please know I am so sorry. Reverie curled around her, and she knew this man. She hadn't known the full shape of his regret, but she knew him. She wasn't surprised, and she could help. Garrus, I'm sorry I was taken. I'm sorry I came back broken. I'm sorry I couldn't break away on my own, and that I brought her back. I almost ended you. I almost ended everyone. But if I hadn't seen your face, if I hadn't heard your voice in my head for weeks telling me to be strong, I wouldn't have made it. It's not about the fact that we were separated. We couldn't prevent that. It's that you never left my heart. I remembered you saying things about approving voices, and that when I died, I'd been in your head. You were with me every day. You did rescue me. You kept me breathing. Please, I took every step in that place with the need to get back to you on my mind, and when I saw you again, that's what saved me. He pressed tighter to her, hunched down, his crest pressed to her shoulder. I was helpless, Karim. Helpless while you were gone. Helpless while they untangled your mind. I watched you scream. I watched you step into that room to talk to Thane, so pale and so strained I thought you would crack, but not bleed. I would have broken under torture. I would have succumbed to indoctrination. I would never, can never resist Drell venom. I swear to you, Karim, I do not deserve you, and do not forgive me, and I am so sorry. Please. This was what Reverie did to him, what he held back, what he needed her to know. what he'd known would pass his lips once he lost control. He'd been able to work out lust on her body with his careful strokes and control. And now he couldn't touch her or take from her, be with her, unless she knew how broken he was. Survivor's guilt. After a cruise. That time frame that resonated with her. That sense that she knew to her bones. He was feeling the helplessness of being unscathed, of having benefited from her capture in the sick, backward way of having used the information of invading her brain to save others. Sway Palavin his way, their way. The way he'd gotten Thane back and her in his arms, seeming to sacrifice her again and flogging her forward to serve. That's how he saw it. She couldn't change that. Couldn't promise to forgive him. This was beyond that. She couldn't unlearn what it felt like to have his indoctrinated voice in her mind urge her to betray everything. He couldn't unlearn what it was like to helplessly search, to helplessly watch. To know all of that searching and watching had been useless. That he'd never have found her. That he was unable to pull her back with his strength or his faith. That he had to wait for her to heal. Not knowing if she ever would. But here he was, his plate pressed to her, his head bowed. She lifted his head with her hands and kissed along the line of his mandible as he trembled. Garrus, take a deep breath. Tell me if I'm lying. I know you'll know. I have heard what you said, and I believe you. I won't offer you forgiveness because I know that will only bring you despair that I don't understand. I want you. I love you. I need you. I will need you every day of my life. And I want it to be a long life, and I want it to be with you. You don't need to tell me anything else. Nothing you say will change how I feel. Nothing you feel will change that. None of the truths that we haven't told each other, mine or yours, will ever change that. He hesitated, held his breath, possibly afraid that she was lying, that she was bluffing. Would he be able to sense that? After long suspended seconds, he drew in a breath, held it, released it slowly, pressed closer and breathed again, deep, savoring, his shoulders dropping in relief as she celebrated his scent, finally blending with hers, the truth and choice on her skin. He tilted his head and breathed until he was panting, his tongue darting out to taste her throat, his hands convulsively tightening on her. And she had to stop kissing along his mandible because his mouth returned to hers. His kiss was mint and faith and the swirling reverie that refreshed and carried her along. Worry and concern swept away as her fingers sought out his skin, traveled along plate, marveled that she could have been afraid at any point of his body. An absurd idea. His arms cradled her, her body suspended, as she had been so many times, as she wanted to be again, and for a lifetime. On hard plate and tough muscle, warm hide and home. She'd finally been able to give something back. She'd finally been able to give him something for himself. And stagnant, fear-bound pools turned back into rivers and fountains. Boundaries swept away as artificial and unnecessary. He set her on her feet with her complaining whimper acknowledged and soothed. He removed her clothing whole, spreading kisses and scrapes of mouth plates, trailing lines of his talons along her revealed body, letting her move her hands to help with his clothing. But no more tearing. There was time, and they were both certain they had more than an hour. They had a lifetime. illusions were swept away, and barriers, physical and emotional, discarded without malice. He had been able to touch her, but hands only, and gentle scrapes of his mouthplates. His voice had echoed ardor with her hands clenched. He'd been unable to taste her, and her hands had been restricted. Her mind focused on struggling through without reminder of prior pain. He'd watched her melt from being tense and unable and unwilling to touch him to wanting him so badly she only had whimpers to express it, to arching her body back against his, with him unyielding and unreachable. With reverie in her system, all those fears and restrictions seemed silly. But there were still resurgent thoughts and little untouchable fears spinning behind her eyes. She wasn't going to reach back to them. She was only going to reach forward. She put her hands on his shoulders because she could, thumbs through ridges. He was watching her as though she were not real, and that's what reverie had to offer him now. His hands covered hers as he dragged his talons through the ridges and traced triple-track paths down her body, eyes on hers until he leaned down to kiss her, reverent and slow. She tensed to surge forward, to press skin to plate, but he held her back, pinning her shoulders to the wall as he focused on kissing her. He used non-verbal cues to direct her body. He'd picked up some pointers from Thane. Oh, Thane, I shouldn't be here with one of you. It should have been both of you, and I still can't touch you. And I'm so sorry. The rippling wash of regret was pushed back by the feel of Garrus's mouth on hers, his tongue twining with hers. She had a thought about trying not to make things more complicated on purpose, but it was that complicated. She had chosen one of them over the other. That was unforgivable, reprehensible. Her breath sped up as Garrus deepened the kiss, waves of pleasure and relief, able to push those thoughts back until she heard Thane's answer in his voice. Necessary. Fitting. We have time, Siha. I did not hold back from touching him because I could not touch you. The unforgivables were forgiven. All of them. Right now. It could not be any other way with grace and joy and pleasure spilling over like fountains. He had her shoulders pinned still, but she reached out to rest her hands on his waist, to stroke plate edges with her thumbs, to press the edges of her fingers to his hide. The echo of Thane's voice soothed the rush of impatience as she heard the refrain. We have time. Garrus was coiled patience and insistence, not holding back, but also not stumbling forward, tasting and exploring what he'd been unable to for so long, now wanting to make up for lost time. This was Turian time, with no final goal and no endpoint. He is not on your rushed and frantic, complicated schedule. You need to be on his. We have time. Tension released from her neck, and her head fell back. He pressed in closer. His hands slid down her shoulders. Light tips of talons on her upper arms, drawing goosebumps on her skin. She took advantage of his patience and studied distance and sought him out with her hands, everywhere she could reach. Instead of bending down to reach her breasts, he lifted her until her breasts were at his mouth level. one arm around her waist and his forearm under her ass, with that impossible Taurian ease of strength that made her heart squeeze. She tilted her head back, panting, eyes closed, her fingers exploring at the base of his fringe, at the side of his neck, along the mandibles that fluttered against her skin. Panting slipped away from her, and she lost control of moans as his tongue tugged on her nipple, teeth scraping lightly. Whatever had changed in her mind, this stayed stable, exacting. He knew her body and what she liked, what she wanted, what she'd never been able to ask for. She could only ask him to touch her, his way. Some alchemy on her skin he created that couldn't be duplicated. He lifted her slowly, and his mouth traveled to her navel, where she was ticklish, and when he licked a teasing line, he got a convulsive giggle from her and an answering laugh from him as an apology, shifting his teeth to the curve of her hip, drawing her back to moans. When he lifted her further, and his tongue traveled to her clit, she was mindless, gentle, spreading numbness, warm teasing that made her squirm in his grip until he pressed her more tightly into position, pinned as he drank from her, moaned into her skin, and growled until she felt it in her hip bones, thighs, and the base of her spine. She was, again, after fearing she never could be, small, feminine, and mated, trembling helplessness as his arms held her pinned and his mouth brought her bliss and growls. Her hands were free to dig into and under plate, nails, and fingertips. She was once again pleased in his name. Home. He brought her to a long, keening, shaken cry that left them both trembling. He kissed the sides of her hips, the creases of her bent legs, kissed back up her body, and lowered her onto him, stinging and burning, tight and tree, slowly, carefully, his black-rimmed eyes watching her face, locking his gaze with hers. Reverie spread through her, transformed somehow, as though the drugs she'd been on for over a month had altered her chemistry and tolerance. She'd expected to pass out. Maybe he expected the same, but it was a richer, deeper thrum in her blood, and she could feel the difference. It wasn't loss of will, but merging of will. And she trusted him to her bones. Felt maybe she could learn to trust herself. It was different. Stronger. Hopeful. She raised a leg to pull him tighter to her, her arms closing around him, pressing him as tightly as she could, hungry to be closer, sated when he was as deep inside her as he could be. His eyes closed. He gave up his own careful control, and his features flowed to reflect his rapidly unspooling emotions. Relief, bliss, release of fear. He tilted his crest to her forehead, wrapped his arms around her. Hard, no longer afraid that his body was going to cause her pain. She gave into the full pulsing beat of reverie, familiar, but deeper, stronger, carved out pieces of herself given more room to experience him. Them. No regrets for the lost parts she no longer needed. She was with him, and that's all she needed, and his arms had shifted from restraint to promise, her mind newly chaotic and entirely pleased by that. She said, "I love you. When my hour is up, I want more hours. Please don't leave me." His hands were in her hair, his mouth at her throat as he said, Never, Karim. All my hours are yours. She took all the hours in front of her, stayed in his arms, both tired of talk for a while. But hands and mouths kept contentedly busy. Thane found them. She had known, Garrus had known he would. He would always find them. Her sleepy eyes saw him in the dim light. He'd just spoken her name, or she wouldn't have known he was there. He wouldn't have intruded into her cabin without permission, but this was not her cabin. It was Garrus's. Another lovely reason to be here. The permissions were all new. Thane was smiling. She thought of reaching out to touch his wonderful smile, but she didn't have permission. She did smile back. Krios, stop standing there grinning. Get in. Garrus patted the bed behind him. Thane opened his mouth. It looked like he was going to disagree, but Garrus said, "Do not make me come get you. I'm comfortable. Don't be a pain in the ass." Thane complied, fit his body in behind Garrus's with his economy of movement, his gloved hand squeezing her shoulder. Garrus turned his head to kiss him, murmured, "Stay. Always in Vasna." All was right inside this room, and that's all she cared about right now. She fell back asleep, nightmares banished, tempered and tested joy warm in her veins.